Hey everybody, I'm putting out this video because we are entering an exciting new chapter in our journey as an independent church. So in this video, what we're going to be talking about is what is an elder. In our previous system in the United Methodist Church, whenever our church would need an elder, one would be sent to us by the bishop. I remember I was serving a church down in Cincinnati on staff. I wasn't an appointed person, and they needed a new pastor. Their pastor was moving to Texas, and the district superintendent brought in an elder, and they met with him, and they said, we just don't think this person is a good fit for our church. And the district superintendent smiled at them and said, well, thank you for telling me that, but this is who you're going to get. And they said, well, what if we don't want him? And he essentially, in a very nice way, said, well, you don't have a choice. Essentially, everything kind of came from the top down in that system, and there was some wiggle room, and I'm not saying that there wasn't communication on trying to find the best person, but largely the elder that a United Methodist congregation would receive was an elder that the bishop sent. Well, you probably can figure out that the bishop of the West Ohio Conference will no longer be sending us elders, and let me assure you, I'm not going anywhere. But it is important for us to continue to identify the people with the graces and gifts for ministry, ordain them as elders in the church, and continue to cultivate them as leaders within our congregation. And that is obviously going to look very different as an independent church than it did when we were a part of a denominational body. So in this video, what I want to talk about is, first and foremost, what is an elder? Because if we're going to ordain elders, we need to know what they are. What are the differences in how we're going to acquire elders as an independent church versus what we did in the United Methodist Church? And then lastly, I want to talk about why that's important and your part in the process. And so we're going to jump into that by first talking about what is an elder. First and foremost, in the scripture, an elder is described as someone who is a servant leader. A few weeks ago, we talked about Jesus washing feet, and that is an example of what the elder is called to do in the church. And if you remember during that sermon, I talked about how Jesus never left his place at the table. Jesus sat at the head of the table, and as the head, he took on the role of the lowest servant. And in many ways, that is a picture of an ideal elder. I don't think any elder actually hits that mark, but through the grace of God, we can live into that example. And that example is the elder is called to love the sheep, to serve the sheep, to wash the sheep's feet, and to get down and dirty with the sheep. And by sheep, I mean the people of God in the church. And at the same time, the elder sits at the head of the table. They are the one that guards the church against false doctrines, against the influence of society that comes against the knowledge of God. And so the elders have two roles. They are the role of the servant leader who loves the people, and they are also the shepherd with the staff that protects the people from the wolves that would seek to infiltrate the flock. You can get a description, a biblical description of the qualifications for an elder in the books of 1 Timothy and in the books of Titus, and we're going to talk about those passages here in a moment. But before I get into the details on that, I want to talk about how we are selecting elders in the life of our church. In this new phase of our journey, the process of becoming an elder starts with recognizing a sense of calling. In the book of 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, Paul writes this: "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of an overseer or an elder, he desires a noble task." And so we see from the very beginning that an elder is someone who aspires to the office. Now, this isn't the same thing as somebody saying, when I grow up, I want to be a stockbroker, or when I grow up, I want to be a teacher. What aspires means is that they recognize that God has placed a unique call on their life, and they earnestly want to chase after it. I remember when I first sensed my call to ministry, I didn't particularly like it or want it. In fact, it was something that I really tried to kind of wiggle off the hook. But as time went on, I realized more and more that that's what Jesus wanted me to do. And there comes a point when I had to be either obedient to my own will or to what I thought the will of God was for my life. And so when I aspired to the office of an elder, it wasn't necessarily because I had some great aspirations in my own strength to do it. The aspiration came because I wanted to do what Jesus was calling me to do. So first and foremost, every elder in our church will aspire to that office. It will be something that they recognize they're called to do. It won't be something where we go to somebody and say, hey there, Timmy, we think you're going to be an elder. And they say, no, no, no. And we say, no, really, please do it. Just come on, give it a try. And they go, well, I'll try it for a few months and we'll see how it goes. No, this is something that they're sure of. They're aspiring to it. They want to be called to it. They want to grow into that grace. And when they aspire to that office, it says in the second verse, therefore an overseer must be above reproach. There's certain qualifications that are there. You must be above reproach. Your reputation has to be impeccable. And he gives a further list here: the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-control, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the same condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. And I'm going to be producing a resource that goes into each one of those qualifications in more detail that will be out on the Welcome Center. And there will also be a booklet coming out later on, actually early next year, that will really go into a deeper dive. But for now, I just kind of wanted to touch on that. The elders, they have to meet those qualifications. Now, no human being is going to meet them perfectly, right? I mean, we're all sinners. We're all in need of grace. But it is a striving after that grace. And so the way that someone could get to that point could vary. Maybe the elders go to somebody and say, hey, we're really seeing some gifts and graces for ministry. Would you pray about if God may be calling you to explore becoming an elder? Or we may have somebody in the church that says, I just can't shake this. I feel like I'm called to ministry. I can't get rid of this feeling. And the elders then might say, hey, well, discern. Here's what an elder is. See if this is something you're called to. And at that point in time, they're going to enter into a discipleship relationship with those on the elder board. And the elders are going to seek to walk with them and help them and cultivate their gifting. And then let's just say, for the sake of argument, that, yeah, it's obvious. These grace and these gifts are on somebody's life. They are called into ministry. Well, when the elders feel like that person is ready, they will present him to the congregation, and we will give you a thorough explanation as to why we think this person has the gifts and the graces for ministry. And then at that point, the church will vote as to whether or not they see the same gifts, and they will affirm them as an elder within our congregation. And so typically when we would do something like that in the UMC would be during what was called the Charge Conference. We do a yearly church conference, and that would certainly be one place that we could do that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we might not have a breakfast after or a lunch after church one day, or have a special service where we can vote and affirm those gifts. And our next church conference is actually going to be on December 8th at 6 o'clock. And I want you to be there because we are going to be voting on elders at that time. And I'll be putting out some more information on that in the very near future. Now, you may be wondering, if it's the elders that are making a recommendation to the congregation as to who should be an elder, how do we get that started? It's the classic, what came first, the chicken or the egg? We have to have some elders in place in order to cultivate and recommend future elders. And so what we decided that we were going to do is we had 3 elders from the United Methodist Church that are part of our fellowship. Pastor John Walters, Pastor Mike Westbay, and myself. Of course, John and Mike are retired, but all 3 of us went through the process of becoming elders in the UMC. We were already recognized as elders by this church, and there was never any dispute. So the decision was made to start with those three, with the three of us then making recommendations to the church for elders going forward. And so that's kind of how we are starting this process. Now I want to give you kind of a real-time example of how this can play out. I'm not saying this is the only way, it's just one way. So one example here is, as we were talking about the next crop of elders, two members of our lead team came to me, Eric Schmelzer and Aaron Longsworth, and they said, Josh, Brian's been serving as an elder in this church for a couple of years now. He has shown us that he has the gifts and the graces, and we really think that he needs to be a part of this going forward. And I agreed. I went to the elders and they agreed. And the only hesitation that they had was that we needed to communicate what an elder was to the church first, which is one of the reasons why this video is coming out. And so on December the 8th, Brian will be one of the people that are being ordained. And in the process of that, I had one of the elders reach out to me after Aaron preached and said, man, that man preaches with authority. He clearly has the gifts and the graces. I don't think we need to ordain one. I think we need to ordain two. And so we're going to be bringing two people before you, and you can see how one kind of came from the lay side but was affirmed by the elders. The other came from what you would call the clergy side and was obviously affirmed by the elders. And then both are going to come back before the church because we want you to affirm the gifts that they have. We're going to subject ourselves to their leadership, and therefore you are going to have a say in this process. But there's a big caveat here. It's not actually your say. This isn't a popularity contest. This isn't going, do I like the person or not? Do I like their messages or not? If you are going to come to vote, then you have a responsibility to pray. And I would ask you to take a season of fasting and prayer and say, Lord, reveal to me if this person truly is an elder. And then if they are, how do you support their ministry? So this isn't just a yes or a no thing. This isn't voting for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. This is a prayerful thing. And if you can't devote some time to prayer, I would just respectfully ask you to abstain from voting. You could still come and support, but don't vote without first taking time to pray, because that's what we want to do. We want to be the body of Christ. We want to embody what this process is supposed to be, and that should be covered by prayer. And then afterwards, continue to pray for your elders as all of us continue to pray for you. If you look at the chart on the screen, it shows the process that we're using as we identify and cultivate and affirm the calling of the elders in our church. But before I go into this, I hope you can see that this applies to really any type of calling. Every one of you watching this video are called to some type of ministry. Some of you are called to helps ministries. Some of you are called to a ministry of preaching and teaching. Some of you may be called to a ministry of encouragement. But every single one of you are called to something. And some people are called into the office of an elder or the office of an overseer, those who oversee the life of the church and make sure that it's living within Christian boundaries. And so as we talk about this chart today, I want you to recognize that this isn't just applicable to elders. It's actually applicable to any area of ministry. But since we're talking about elders today, we're going to look at this in the context of elders. So the first thing we have to do as we develop ministers, as we develop elders in the church, is we have to identify the elder. We have to see that there are certain people that have gifts and graces that would align with being an elder of the church. Now, just because we identify somebody as having the potential of having those gifts, it doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of the day, we're going to find out that they're actually called to be elders. We may say, wow, this person has some really good preaching and teaching gifts. And as we look at it, they're not really called to an oversight role. They're maybe called to preach and teach in a prison, or maybe they're called to do preaching and teaching somewhere out in the world or in Sunday school or something like that. But first and foremost, they have to be identified. And then part of that process is, if you remember earlier, we said that an elder is somebody that has to aspire to the office. So as we're kind of looking at that and discerning that and identifying that, if they say, I think that this is something that I'm actually called to, well, the next step is we need to cultivate them. And in the church, we cultivate through discipleship and growth. And there's not going to be one central process that we use for this. We are going to pray. We're going to look at the gifting of the people, and the elders that are already on the board will walk alongside those who are called, and we will teach and equip them. But more importantly, we will pray God's grace over their lives and pray that they will be used by the Holy Spirit. And then lastly, after that discipleship and growth happens, not that it ever stops. This isn't just it's not a step-by-step process as much as it is just trying to kind of show you the direction that things are going. So after the discipleship and growth, while that is happening and they grow into the role, then we have affirmation and confirmation. So the elders then affirm the calling of the person. They bring them before the church, and the church confirms those gifts. And again, I want to stress, this isn't a step 1, 2, 3, 4 type of process. There are many ways that people might move through this. We have one young man right now who's identifying whether or not he thinks that he's called to be an elder. And while he's working through that identification process, we're still cultivating him. We're not saying, okay, well, once you get things identified, then we'll start discipling you. No, it's through that discipleship that really he's going to be able to pray and discern and seek whether or not he identifies as an elder and whether the elders would agree with that. We have somebody else right now that's in the discipleship and growth phase, and I think, soon might move into that affirmation and confirmation phase. And at that point, we'll bring that individual before the church. And so I just wanted to give you this visual representation of kind of what the process of becoming an elder might look like. I know I've gone over this already, but just in summary, I want to make sure that we are going over the differences between the system now and the system that we were under in the United Methodist Church. In the United Methodist Church, the church really had very little say. You would fill out a profile, and the cabinet hopefully prayed over it, but oftentimes that wasn't always the case. Many times it was, okay, what pastor wants to be in what location, and what are their salary needs, and we're going to plug names into places. I mean, it's sad, but it's a true reality of the appointment system. And the system that we're under now, the selection will be made by the board of elders. So if somebody is going to get into the process, it has to be through the identification of the elders themselves. But then after the elders make that recommendation, after a period of discipleship and showing you all of the fruit, then you have a chance to buy into that decision, celebrate the graces and the gifts that the elders have identified in the candidates being brought before you, and affirm that through voting for them and celebrating what God is doing in their lives. This is just a really high overview. I know that there are going to be other questions. There is an set of elder guidelines that basically goes over all the scriptural principles around eldership and what we feel like it means in the life of Wapak First. So essentially what we did is we didn't put a lot of, the Methodist Book of Discipline's about that thick. What we did is we just took the scriptures. We let the scriptures basically speak for themselves, and then we just put a short commentary after each one saying how we feel that connects to the life of Wapak First, because our goal is to really let the scriptures be our guide. And so I'm going to put those elder guidelines out on the Welcome Center for you to check those out. And then in the new year, I have a much more robust resource on what is an elder. It kind of goes into more detail. It's written more as a short book for you to look at if you're looking for more information. And of course, we are always here to answer any questions that you might have. So I just want to thank all of you if you hung on to the end of this video to begin getting some of the information that you need to be an active part of your church family. Again, I want to remind you, December 8th at 6 o'clock, we'll be voting on Aaron and Brian, and I would hope that you are able to come and join us there. And in the meantime, please be in prayer for all of your elders. Be in prayer for your church. be in prayer for one another, and let us go out and do great work for Jesus. Again, I appreciate your time, and I sure hope that you're having a great week.